Awesome. Well, welcome everyone, and just want to make sure everyone can hear me. Looks like you can. I'm opening up the chat and Q&A so that I have some feedback here. Awesome. And Q&A. Right. Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for joining. This is a topic which I feel is important for product builders to know and to understand. And the reason there is that there are so many great products that are littered in the startup graveyard. What that means is there's all these builders and makers that have done, and product leaders that have done so much great work to build products that actually solve customer problems and are actually viable. However, um, because of not understanding user psychology, not understanding how our brain works, and that can have, and not getting messaging right to what our users, the way that our users think, these products fail. So what we're going to talk about today are user psychology principles that you can use to help grow your product. A note here is that this is something that we talk about in our course, but we talk about it at the end of the course. We talk about it at the end because although these principles are powerful, we want you to use these principles not to coerce or deceive your users into building, into downloading your products, using your products, but we want to use them by being ethical and being responsible around your usage. So very powerful principles. You should use them when you have developed a product that really solves customer value, but don't be deceptive around using these principles to get your users to do what you want them to do. So let's start and get into it. So it turns out that over the years, technology around us changes, but our brain hasn't changed. So what we see over here is, this is a picture from 1907. And what this is showing is a projection of the telegram of what's going to happen in the future next year. And what they're showing us is, hey, you know what? People are going to be stuck in their technology. And this is a projection for a technology that was over 100 years old. And today we see ourselves, we're all lost in our technology. And what's happening here is that although technology around us changes, what doesn't change is our brain and how our brain is made up. And by understanding our brain and how it works, we can help actually increase adoption to our products. And at a foundational level, our brain isn't actually one brain. We have three brains. We have a new brain that allows us to think. We have the middle brain, which allows us to feel emotion. And it's the old brain that decides and keeps us alive. And we'll go into more about what that all looks like. To help you take the principles of our brain in a decision-making framework, this is what we're going to be going through. This is Product Faculty's decision-making framework. On one end of the framework, you have the cost and the friction of the decision that you're trying your users to make. And on the other end are the levers of that you can use to get the decision that you want. And we're going to be digging deeper into these levers and to further amplify what we're going to be going through today in a really jam-packed half hour is essentially this. So we're going to be going through all these levers that you have available to you to allow you to get your message across to users and get them to use your product, go through your onboarding flow, download your app, whatever it is that you're trying to do. So you'll see that the first thing that we talk about is the instinctual brain, which is the old brain. So going back to our chart of the brain, we said that we have three brains and not just one brain. We have the new brain, which is newly developed, allows us to think, allows us to make rational decisions. We have the old brain, which allows us to feel, and we have so the middle brain that allows us to feel, the old brain that decides. The best way to understand the difference between our new rational brain versus our old reptilian brain is to contrast. And so here's how the brains differ. So the old brain is 500 million years old, whereas the new brain is only 3 to 4 million years old. The old brain, it is designed to keep us alive. So it's fast, but it's limited. The new brain on the other end is slow, but it's smart. The old brain is always on because it's going to make sure that we're always, not getting attacked by things. Whereas the new brain can sense past, present, and future. The old brain is always on, whereas the new brain, you can turn it on and off. And finally, the old brain is essentially unconscious, uncontrollable, whereas the new brain is somewhat controllable and conscious and effortful. So now that we know that the old brain keeps us alive, by shaping our message to to perceive what the old brain perceives well, we can actually amplify our message to make sure that it gets across better. So what are the six things that the old brain sees more than others? These are the six things. Number one, if your message is self-centered, if your message is presented in a contrast, if your message is tangible, if your message, you're really making sure that the first and last are kept are amazing, and then finally the last one, visual and emotional. So by keeping your message aligned with all of these things, you will make sure that the old brain gets your message and your product gets adopted more. So let's go through all of these one by one. Number one, no surprise, we are self-centered. Yes, we like to think we care about others, and we do, but when you have a message that is directed at you, you're more likely to get across to your users. So that's why the army says, I want you in the army, or Sprite says, obey your thirst, and Yahoo had, do you Yahoo. And so the way that you can use that is by simply looking at your landing pages, and instead of talking about yourself, talk about your user. Don't say we, say you, really make them the hero of it's the center of your attention, and make them, lift them up. The next thing that's really powerful is contrast. So our brain, old brain sees contrast very well. So if you can present things in before and after or contrast tables, it helps with understanding significantly. So here we've got, before and after of a bedroom. We've got, if you're taking drugs, what will happen to you if you take drugs, and so seeing it before and after really registers with our brain, and another one around hair products as well. The next thing is making things super tangible, right? So here it says reserved for drunk drivers, and you can see that, you're going to end up in a tree if you drink and drive. The next one is really making sure that the first and the last part of anything that you're delivering is really powerful. So George Lucas, who made Star Wars, he said the secret to a good movie is a hot opening, a hot closing, and just don't screw up the middle, right? So really kind of capturing those principles we just shouted about. And finally, the next one being visual.
I'm always walking to the same old place, just in case I see your face. I'm gonna buy a drink, and while I wait, I'ma eat my cake, make the same mistakes. I know that you don't think that I can be the one, but I can be your one. I may be acting crazy now, it's getting late. You took my heart away, but I'll be okay, 'cause in my dream world, I'm still your dream girl. No if buts or maybes, I'm still your baby. Ooh, I'm still your dream girl. Ooh, I'm still your dream girl. Ooh, I'm still your dream girl.
So this is the highest viewed iPad ad ever made. And guess what? It doesn't talk about a single feature or spec. It's fully visual, right? So Apple really gets this message well. And then finally, likely one of the most important things is emotion. Anytime you can get emotion into your messaging, you're going to make sure that your message really gets across. Have you ever noticed? I'm sure all of you guys are on LinkedIn. Have you ever noticed that any message on LinkedIn that goes viral is really emotional, right? So, I worked really hard, I lost my job, and I struggled, and I landed a new job, or this company rescinded my offers. They get 5,000 likes. It's because as humans, emotions really do, we feel emotions very strongly. And anytime you can have messaging that encapsulates emotions, you're going to be in a really good place. So those are the things that our old brain sees. And if we can, put our messaging to optimize for those, we're going to make sure that what we're trying to do gets done better. So the second one is really around the middle brain, which allows us to feel. And we're going to go through these, the feelings that we are important to our users. Now, it turns out that, we think we are super logical human beings, that we rationally make our decisions. Actually, people make decisions emotionally and we justify them logically. And unfortunately, as product managers and product leaders, when we're building our landing pages, we're all about talking about our features and our team talking about our specs. But actually, if we focused on emotions, we would get over to our users, we would get our message across to our users a lot better. So, uh, you know, so really keeping this mind can be helpful. Now, when it comes to emotion, it can be overwhelming for product managers and growth PMs to think about, hey, what emotions do I need to cover? Actually, there isn't an unlimited amount of emotions. There's a limited set of emotions that you're trying to get across to users. So firstly, as humans, we love to feel. We love to feel anything, good, bad, whatever it is. So capturing anything around feeling is super strong. The next one is we like to defend and we like to protect. This can be our country. This can be our group. It can be our company. So this is a message that that this is something that we can also use. We love to defend and protect things. The next one is we like to feel loved. That's why community is so important, right? What Scott's doing here with the makers community is amazing because we love to feel bond, and we love to feel part of a group. And next is we love to avoid pain. So any messaging around, especially if you're building security products and you talk about, hey, you will not lose your data if you use our product, or antivirus software, like just the avoidance of pain can be a really emotional need that you can satisfy and get across to users. So, if hypothetically, if you're building a product that talks about that's like antivirus software, don't talk about, features or spec, but talk about the avoidance of pain in your message, and that's going to resonate a lot better. The next one is we love to hoard and we love to acquire. Now, as humans, we love to acquire things and never use them, right? So, I mean, how many PDFs do you guys have you all downloaded, or reports or books? I mean, I've got a bunch of books here. I haven't read all of them, but we love to acquire things and collect things, but we may not use them. So, but that's something that you can also use in your messaging. We love to seek status. We all want a higher status, and that's where people are fanatical about their airline points. Why? It's just because it's about status, right? So, and finally, we like to learn and we're curious. So an example here of using these principles in play, the Global Mail. So what does the Global Mail do? It was, then you go to theglobalmail.com, you'll see the article, then you'll see the paywall afterwards. Why don't you see the paywall right away? Well, because they strike our curiosity and we see the article, but then it gets covered up. So they're using the principle of, the fact that we like to learn and curious to get us to pay and go beyond their paywall. Next, you see what the Global Mail says: that support quality journalism. And the emotion that they're going for here is to defend and to protect quality Canadian journalism. And then finally, if you sign up, you will get all of the past articles that we've always published. Does anybody want to read old news? I don't think so, but they're going after that principle of to collect and acquire to make sure, just as we know, as humans will do that. And finally, let's look at a B2B example here. Same thing. We've got ADA Support, which is one of the a big B2B company out of Toronto that does for support reps to automate part of their role. Again, you have a PDF report. People will download that even if they don't use it to defend and protect. So what this is saying that hey, agents, if you use our product, don't worry, you're not going to lose your job. What you're going to do is we're going to allow you to free up your time to do better things. So hitting on the defending and protecting their roles, it's not like you're not going to have your job, you're just going to be doing better things. And then finally, to feel, and you've got making your visitors feel really happy with smiling faces and energy, which makes you, like the company more. So um, we first talked about the old brain and the what you need to do to get the message across to your old brain. Then we talked about the feelings, and finally the last thing is the rational appeals that you need to get your message across to users. Now, the size of the items that we've talked about aligns with how important those things are. So the instinctual brain and getting your message across using those principles is most important. Then it's emotion, and then it's rational. And actually, as product managers and product leaders, we do the exact opposite. We prioritize rational appeals much more than the other. So the note here is that, look, even though emotions is important, people need to justify their emotion with some logic. So one is more important than the other, but you cannot not have logic. And let's look at this ad here, and you'll see the constant juxtaposition of hitting on emotion, hitting on logic, hitting on emotion, hitting on logic. And this is another Apple ad. So you saw in the ad the constant juxtaposition of emotional appeal, rational appeal, emotional appeal, rational appeal. And this is something that reflects our behaviors too. We first, let's say if you're buying a car or a house, you're first going to fall in love with it. And then you're going to find all the reasons why it is a good decision, right? So you'll look at an expensive, especially cars, you'll fall in love with a certain car, and then you'll find all these reasons why it's, good from a rational standpoint. So when it comes to rational appeals, even though they're less important, you do have to have them. And the three layers of rational appeals that you have to have are specifications, facts and figures, and cost. And you can see here, this is a B2B example of Shopify's landing page. They've got specifications, they've got facts and figures. And looking at a consumer example, let's look at the Dyson lamp here. And I would love for folks, if you can put it in the questions, can you don't Google this, but guess the price of this Dyson lamp. How much do you think that this Dyson lamp costs after you see the video? And you can, while you see the video, you can post it as well. You can put it into the Q&A. Oh, there, I see it. 700, 900. So lots of guesses here, everything from 700, 900, 500, 1500. Slab costs $1,200, right? So wow, that's really, really expensive. Now, for someone to buy a $1,200 lamp, you can see how they show the use cases of what it makes you feel like you are, a scientist working at your desk, or it's, it says something about you. It's a status decision. You're emotionally falling in love with it. But at the same time, you have to have some rational appeal. And that's why they say this is intelligent light. They talk about, it's made out of LED, what LEDs, or how it senses the light around it. And so basically what that is doing is it's saying, hey, fall in love with it emotionally, but you also have to justify it to yourself rationally. And here are all the rational reasons why you would want to buy it. So very, very interesting what Dyson's done here. When it comes to facts and figures, note that don't do more than 4 to 5 facts and figures, because your brain just can't process that much. And so limit it to 4 to 5 facts, and know that hitting on the emotion is more important than rational appeal, especially for products that are more expensive. So what we talked about on the decision scale framework, on the one end, are the levers that you have to get the decision that you want to make. But what you're weighing it against is the cost and the friction of that decision. So let's talk about the cost and friction here. In terms of the cost and friction, cost, how much does it cost to, essentially buy the product? Or if there isn't a cost, then what are the frictions that you have to overcome to get the decision that you want if you are building free products? And essentially there's 3 types of frictions. There is, number one is the interaction friction. So what you can see here is when you type in an address on Google Maps, you want to go from A to B. When you want to come back, you don't have to copy the address from B to A. You just press this one button and it just reverses the directions, which is a great example of reducing interactive friction. Next is cognitive friction. So friction around getting us to think. And so with the drop shipping industry, when that became really a thing that a lot of people are doing, which is essentially just buying products from AliExpress and then branding them, selling them in North America, there was a lot of cognitive friction with managing people's addresses and making sure items are delivered on time. So Ship came across and said, hey, we'll take care of all of this for you so you don't have to worry about it. And that's an example of taking cognitive friction away. And the very last example is emotional friction. So, prior to Tinder, if anybody can remember that world, you had to go on a dating site, you pour your heart out in a message to someone, and then you might not hear back from them. So it takes a lot of emotional energy to get a response. Whereas Tinder, love is just a swipe. So they've really reduced a lot of the emotional friction that goes into a very heavy interaction. So those are the 3 examples of the type of frictions that you have to overcome. So essentially what we have here is you have your cost and friction on one end. On the other end, you have the principles that you can use to get the decisions that you want. And you can use product faculty decision scale framework to help you get your decision made. Now, in terms of the one last thing, there are precision boosts, but we don't have time to cover that. If you do want to read about this further or go into it deeper, we have a free book that has all this information and quite a lot more. You can go to www.psychology.pm and really dig into this and look at examples of how to implement this in your products. And this is really important because I just see so many amazing products and so many amazing builders building great products. And when I look at their landing pages, they're horrible. And they're just so feature and fact based, and they're entirely not going to get across to the user. So you might be solving a real need. You most likely are solving a real need. You're building great products. However, if you don't position your messaging in a way that the brain understands, you're going to be lost. So that's why using these principles can be really valuable in helping you do that. So with that, I am happy to take some questions.
That's awesome. Thanks, Mo. Really appreciate it. We'll leave a moment for people to ask their questions using the Q&A, and then we can get those kind of started in there. I'll start off a little bit because I think your talk reminded me so much of an early book that I read, and this is the title of it. I don't even know if it's even still in print anymore, but Waiting for a Cat to Bark by Jeffrey Eisenberg and Brian Eisenberg. This was a book that I got introduced to when I was back in the day of doing more web analytics work, I guess you could say, and product. And in particular, they had a very fascinating case study that leveraged a lot of the same techniques you talked about. It was for a company called Leo Diamonds. And the case study in that model is basically, appealing to all these different dimensions: the emotional dimension of choosing a diamond, the actual sort of data and numeracy and kind of importance of facts and figures for that certain audience that needed that, and how they weave that through all their copy and their content. It was really fascinating sort of piece that emphasized some of the importance of some of these psychology points. So yeah, if anybody's interested, maybe you can pick up an old copy of that one. It might be a good read to look for.
Totally. Yeah, I'm gonna check
I
it
don't know
out.
that we have any questions quite yet. So if there's anybody that has anything they want to raise, feel again to use the Q&A. We'd be happy to have that. I guess I'm curious on like what's been the big takeaways, in putting this kind of material together for yourself. What's been the big takeaways in terms of and impacts maybe to the products that you work on and manage?
Yeah. So the impact has really came from in the program that we run, we get founders and product managers and growth PMs, and looking at the experiments and what they're prioritizing, it's entirely missing the emotional appeals and these sort of principles. They're all about, well, let's talk about how long our battery life is, or let's talk about, we are Twitter-like features. Well, what does that mean? What does hashtags mean? Your customers are not using your product because of hashtags. They're using your products because it's solving, hitting on some emotion. So it's, seeing the vast array of bad landing pages and the under prioritization of these principles when it comes to your growth backlog, what allowed, I said, well, we need to talk about this, and by doing this you see the impact right away, right? So when you are, what very tangibly, when it comes to prioritization and putting these principles in play, your top homepage, the above the fold, is the most important aspect of it. So if you want to see the impact of this, just run an A/B test on that to touch on these principles, as opposed to talking about your hashtags, your Twitter-like features in your SaaS product, and you'll see the massive impact that is going to have right away on your leads or whatever you're collecting. So yeah.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool. We got one question here I can see from Ryan Martin. Is there a difference between the old brain's emotional response and the midbrain's emotional focus?
Ryan, that's an excellent question. So they are linked. So in the old brain, feels any messages with emotions are super important. But then the middle brain, when we go further into that, well, what are those emotions? What do we like? What as humans do we like to feel? And that is where the middle brain goes into a little bit more detail on hitting on those emotions. And that's bigger than the rest, because emotion just ends up being super, super important, right? The LinkedIn example that I used, just go on your LinkedIn feed today and scroll, and you're going to see those messages with 5,000 likes are about someone landing a job through adversity. It's about someone, maybe losing a family member or something. Anything around emotions are just like skyrocketing in terms of virality. So, using that it can be really powerful in our products. And we do the exact opposite. We talk about our features, we talk about our specs. We should be hitting on these emotions.
Yeah, that's great. I want to touch on one last point, just to kind of wrap up before we do. You mentioned earlier the ethics side of this equation, and that there's sort of a good side and a bad side to this. Obviously, like the dark patterns that we see in user experience, maybe being a great example of that. I'm curious, I guess, how organizations, how teams can bring that sort of philosophy of ethics and make sure that they're not getting lost in the trap of making the mistake of introducing all those patterns and creating all those bad ways of working.
Yeah, it's a great question, Scott, and that's something that I think about a lot. And we, when I talk about it, when I teach, I do put a caveat of using principles such as these to build products that are viable. But there's so many examples of products that are unethical, and they're using these principles to get users to do what you want them to do without that, without the ethics in place. And really, I think what it comes down to is there is personal responsibility on product leaders to make sure that they are using these principles appropriately. But what's more important is, hey, there's all these, what I feel like is really negative is there's all these people that are building viable products that are solving great problems that aren't using these principles, and they should be using these principles. That's really where we're democratizing this knowledge for folks that are worked so hard to solve real problems that are niche, or even for consumers that aren't using these principles. But if you are using them, note to do it with the right ethics in place.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Mo, really thanks again for the time today, and all the support for our event. This has kind of been an interesting first mini conference that we've had, and I really appreciate you sharing your knowledge on things. With that in mind, we'll kind of wrap up on stuff. And as a reminder too, if you found today helpful, we also have another great event coming up in October on how to run product at scale, which is our Product Excellence Summit here at Productboard, and encourage you to check that out as well. There's information as well on the Product Makers community for that.